In the suburbs of Chicago, David arranged the goods on his small counter, pulling fresh vegetables from cardboard boxes. His hands, once delicate and well-groomed, were now rough from his daily hard work. "Good morning, Miss Anderson," he greeted the elderly woman who bought tomatoes from him every morning. "I've got some great ones today." "Oh, David," the woman sighed, looking at the red fruits. "You know, I heard from Tommy that your vegetables aren't the freshest." David felt something tighten in his chest. "Miss Anderson, you've known me for 3 years. I've never—" "I'm sorry, dear," the woman interrupted him, shaking her head. "I'd rather buy from someone else today." David watched in silence as she walked toward Tommy's counter. Another regular customer he had lost because of dirty gossip. Memories of his own farm, 80 acres of fertile land in Minnesota, flashed through his mind. He remembered waking up at dawn to check the fields, how happy he was to see the first sprouts, how he dreamed of a big farm. Now all that was left of that dream was a worn wallet with $37. "Hey, David!" A rude shout pulled him out of his thoughts. It was Robert Pierce, the owner of the market. "I have news for you." David tensed. Lately, Pierce's news had never been good. "Starting next month, I'm raising the rent," Robert announced without preamble. "The market is developing. Demand is growing." "By how much?" David asked quietly, already knowing he wouldn't like the answer. "Twice," Robert tapped his fingers on the counter. "And you're a week behind on your monthly payment." David felt his palms sweat. "Mr. Pierce, you know, sales are down." "These rumors about stale goods are not my problem," Robert cut him off. "I expect the money by tonight. If you don't pay me, find another place." When Robert left, David sank down heavily on the old wooden box. He remembered his mother, who still runs a small flower shop in Minneapolis. She begged him not to sell the farm, offered to help him, but he was too proud. He wanted to do it alone. Now the whole day was a blur. Customers bypassed his stall, heading for the brightly colored signs of his competitors. By 4 o'clock, he had sold only 2 kilograms of potatoes and a bunch of carrots. His stomach was churning with hunger. He had skipped lunch again, saving every cent. "Still hanging on to this place?" Tommy's mocking voice came through. "You know, I could buy it back. I offered Pierce twice as much." David clenched his fists but didn't say anything. Once upon a time he would have responded, maybe even started a fight. But now he didn't have the energy for it. In the evening, as he counted his receipts under a dim lamp, he thought about his life. 4 years ago, he had everything: a successful farm, plans for the future, confidence in the future. One bad harvest, a few miscalculations with loans, and everything fell apart like a house of cards. $43. That's the whole day's earnings, barely enough to pay the electricity bill in his small apartment on the outskirts of town. David put the money in his worn wallet and began to collect the unsold goods. Most of it will have to be thrown away. The vegetables won't look fresh tomorrow. As he walked home, he had no money for a taxi. He thought that maybe it was time to give up, to return to his mother, to admit defeat. In his apartment on the 5th floor of an old building without an elevator, David tried not to look at the cracks in the walls and the stains from the leaking roof. He used to dream of his own house in the suburbs, of a family, of children running around on a green lawn. Now his only companion was an old photo of a farm that he kept in a dresser drawer. Going to bed on the crushed couch, David thought about tomorrow, about where to get the money for the rent, about how to get his clients back, about whether he would have the strength to keep fighting. 2 weeks had passed since the day Robert raised the rent. David was barely staying afloat, selling vegetables at reduced prices to compete with Tommy. It was a cold October morning. David spotted her as he was arranging the fresh apples, a young woman in a worn gray coat standing a little to the side of the counter. Her eyes were fixed on the fruit, but she didn't come any closer. A few minutes later, she was still standing there, clutching a worn handbag to her chest. "Can I help you?" David finally asked, noticing how she was holding her stomach with one hand. She was pregnant, perhaps 7 or 8 months. The woman flinched at his voice. "Oh no, I'm just looking." Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "I have very tasty apples today." David took one and wiped it on his apron. They just came from the Wilson farm. She came closer, and now he could see her better. She was young, maybe 25, with big brown eyes and a pale face. There were dark circles under her eyes, as if she hadn't slept for a long time. "My name is Jennifer," she said suddenly, touching the apple. "I just wanted to see the prices. The doctor said I needed more vitamins," but she fell silent, her eyes downcast. David noticed that she was not wearing a wedding ring on her left hand, although there was a light band on her finger as if she had recently taken it off. "You know," David felt something tighten in his chest at her confused look. "I have some apples that I'm supposed to give away today. They're perfectly fresh, he thought for a moment, just a little bruised in transit." "Oh no, I can't accept," Jennifer began, but David was already putting the best apples and a couple of juicy oranges into a bag. "Please," he handed her the bag. They would have gone bad by the evening anyway. Jennifer hesitated, her eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand, I really can't pay. I lost my job last month, and who's talking about money?" David smiled gently. "Just promise me you'll eat them today. The vitamins can't wait." She took the package with trembling hands. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," David replied, noticing how she carefully clutched the package to her chest as if it were her greatest treasure. "Just take care of yourself. And the baby." Jennifer nodded, wiping away a tear that had rolled down her cheek. "I'll be sure to repay you when I can. I will remember your kindness." She walked away slowly, stopping from time to time to catch her breath. David watched her until she disappeared around the corner. Something about her reminded him of his younger sister Lizzie, who had died in childbirth 5 years earlier. Perhaps that's why he couldn't just pass her by. "You're giving away goods again, aren't you?" Tommy's caustic voice sounded. "You're going to go bankrupt like that." David didn't even turn to him. He was thinking about Jennifer, her tired eyes and shaking hands. Something told him that there was much more to her story than just losing her job. All day long he found himself looking for her among the passers-by. Several times he thought he saw her gray coat in the crowd, but it was other women. In the evening, when he counted the proceeds, he did not regret the lost profit. Perhaps for the first time in a long time he felt that he had done something really important. On the way home, David thought about how strange life is. He had lost almost everything he had, but he could still help someone who needed it more. Perhaps there was a point to it. It had been 5 days since Jennifer had visited David's counter. It was an unusually quiet morning. Most of the vendors hadn't arrived yet, and the first customers were just starting to show up. "Are you going to be late again, David?" Robert Pierce appeared suddenly, rubbing his hands together from the cold. "There's only 1 day left." "I know," David said tiredly. "I'll make a payment today." "Part?" Robert hummed. "You know my rules." He was interrupted by the sound of an engine. A late-model black Mercedes pulled into the empty parking lot near the market. Robert whistled. "Wow, it's been a long time since we've seen a car like that here." A tall man in an impeccable navy blue suit got out of the car. His shoes shone despite the mud and puddles around him. He walked confidently to the counters, looking at the seat numbers. "Excuse me," the stranger said to Robert. "I'm looking for a salesman named David. I was told he works here." David felt his heart speed up. Thoughts of the IRS, creditors, debt collectors, all those who might be looking for him raced through his mind. "It's me," he finally said, stepping forward. The man looked him up and down. "Mr. Richard White," he introduced himself, holding out his business card. "I represent the law firm of White and Partners. May I speak with you in private? Robert, who was still standing nearby, took the hint and moved away, but stayed close enough to watch the conversation. I haven't violated anything, David began to defend himself. All my documents are in order. Oh, no, no, Richard interrupted him with a slight smile. You misunderstand. I'm not here to check. I have a letter for you. He pulled out a stamped envelope from his inside jacket pocket. The paper was so white and of such high quality that David was even afraid to touch it with his hands, which were dirty from work. What is it? He asked, carefully opening the envelope. An invitation to a meeting, Richard answered, from a very influential person who wants to meet you. David pulled out the letter. The text was printed on the same expensive paper. Dear Mr. David, I would like to invite you to a business meeting today at 5 o'clock in the evening at LeBlanc Restaurant on Michigan Avenue. Please do not refuse this request, as it is an important matter for both of us. Sincerely, William Burns. I don't understand. David read the letter twice. I'm sorry, I'm not authorized to disclose details, Richard replied. But believe me, it's in your best interest. What if I refuse? David felt uncomfortable with the whole situation. That's your right, Richard shrugged. But Mr. Burns rarely invites people to meetings, and even more rarely does he do it twice. David looked at his watch. It was 9 in the morning. But I can't leave the counter. Oh, don't worry about it, Richard interrupted him. We've settled everything with the market owner. You'll be paid for today, even if you don't work. David noticed Robert nodding his head vigorously from a distance. Something about this situation seemed unreal. You have time to think about it, Richard said, heading for the car. But I recommend you not to be late. And he looked at David's clothes. Perhaps you should wear something more formal. When the black Mercedes disappeared from the parking lot, Robert ran up to David. What was that? What's in the letter? But David did not answer. He looked at the envelope in his hands and thought it might be a trap. But if so, why go to all the trouble? And who is this William Burns? LeBlanc turned out to be exactly as luxurious as David had expected. Mr. David? The receptionist approached him. Please follow me. You are expected. She led him through the main hall to a separate office. 2 men in black suits stood at the door, obviously security. Finally, he heard a familiar voice as the door opened. Jennifer was standing by the window. She looked completely different now, wearing an elegant dress, professional makeup, and expensive jewelry. Jennifer? David was confused. I don't understand. Please sit down. A deep male voice caught his attention. A stately man of about 60 was sitting at the table. I'm William Burns, Jennifer's father. David slowly sank down into the chair, feeling dizzy from all that was happening. Dad, it's him, Jennifer said excitedly. This is the salesman I was telling you about. William looked at David carefully. You know, Mr. David, my daughter has been conducting a strange experiment lately. She's been walking around the city unguarded, talking to ordinary people. She says she wants to understand real life. I didn't know, David muttered. Of course you didn't. William poured himself a glass of water. That was the point. Jennifer has visited hundreds of shops and markets. Do you know how many people offered her free help? David shook his head in silence. None, William answered. Except for you. And you know what's most interesting? You're the only one who did it without knowing who she was. David began, but Jennifer interrupted him. You have no idea how important that was to me. I was so confused that day. My husband, she stammered. Anyway, your kindness meant a lot to me. William stood up and walked over to the window. You know what I do, Mr. David? I run a supermarket chain called Fresh Market. Have you heard of it? David nodded. Who hasn't heard of the largest premium grocery store chain in the state? We have a problem, William continued. Our managers are great with numbers, but they have no idea how to handle produce. They don't know a ripe tomato from an overripe one. And he paused. You know all this from the inside, don't you? I used to have a farm, David answered quietly. I know, William nodded. We've checked your history. Debts, crop failures, the bank took the land. But you know what else we found out? You tried to save your employees' jobs to the last. You paid their salaries even when you were barely making ends meet. David felt himself blushing. These memories were still painful. I have a proposal, William returned to the table. I need a head of the farm department in our new store, a person who understands both the business and the products, a person with principles. You're offering me a job? David couldn't believe his ears. I'm offering you a chance, William replied. A salary, health insurance, a company car, and the opportunity to do what you do best, work with farm products. Jennifer came closer. Please take the job. We need people like you. David sat there, unable to say a word. In the morning, he thought he would lose his counter, and now, think about it until tomorrow, William said, standing up. Richard will give you all the documents. A month has passed since David accepted William Burns' offer. His life had changed so dramatically that sometimes he woke up at night and couldn't believe it was real. Good morning, Mr. David. Linda, his new assistant, greeted him as he entered the Fresh Market office. You have a meeting with the farmers at 9 o'clock today. David nodded, still getting used to having his own office and assistant. His new job was to build relationships with local farmers and monitor product quality. Mr. Turner is waiting downstairs, Linda added. He's brought samples of the new crop. As David walked down to the produce section, he remembered his last day at the market. Tommy was looking at him with his mouth open as he handed over the keys to the stall to the new tenant. Robert Pierce tried to apologize for his rudeness, but David simply shook his hand and wished him well. David, the old farmer Turner waved at him, look at the tomatoes I've grown. David smiled, taking a juicy red fruit in his hands. Great harvest, John. How many boxes can you deliver each week? As many as you order, the farmer replied happily. You know, at first I didn't believe that such a large network would work with small farmers, but you changed everything, and it was true. Within a month, David had established partnerships with dozens of local farmers. He knew how hard it was for them to compete with the big suppliers, so he developed a special support program. David, William Burns' voice came through. He was standing at the entrance to the warehouse. Can I see you for a minute? William looked pleased in his office. You know, I got the reports for last month. Sales in the farm department were up 30%. People appreciate quality products, David replied, and the stories behind them. That's right, William nodded. By the way, Jennifer sends her best to you. She gave birth last week. A boy. David smiled, remembering that day at the market. Give her my congratulations. On his way home in his new company car, David drove past the old market. He often drove this way, even though he could have taken a shorter route. Something drew him here, perhaps the memory of how things had changed. His new apartment was in a good neighborhood overlooking a park. There was no more leaky roof or cold radiators. There was an envelope from the bank on the table, a confirmation that his down payment for the new apartment had been accepted. David sat down in a chair and pulled out an old photo of his farm from a drawer. It used to evoke pain and bitterness, but now he looked at it with gratitude. Perhaps he had to go through all these trials to be where he was now. The phone rang. It was his mother. Son, how are you? I am so proud of you. I'm fine, Mom, he replied. You know, I'm thinking of opening a support program for farmers who find themselves in a difficult situation, to help them save their farms. That's a great idea, said the mother. You always had a good heart. After the conversation, David went out onto the balcony. The evening city was twinkling with lights, and he thought about how strange life is. Sometimes the darkest night can lead to the brightest dawn. He remembered the words William had said to him a month ago. Success is measured not only by money, but by how many people you have helped along the way. The next morning, as he walked into the office, David noticed a young woman standing hesitantly at the entrance. Something in her eyes reminded him of his old self: confusion, fear, hope. He approached her. "Can I help you?" She shuddered. "I'm looking for a job, but I have no experience." David smiled. "You know, sometimes the most important thing is not experience, but the desire to work and help others. Shall we go to my office and talk?"